Hello everyone and welcome back to another Trekyards Originals. I am Captain Foley.
And I am Commander Kongs. Welcome back, guys. Well, it's time to return to the Bessig verse. The man behind it all, Mr. David Bessig. He's here! Right here!
Thank you, guys. It's a real pleasure to be back here on Trekyards to continue our deep dive into my alternative Trek reality.
I feel phased into a different reality. It's what's old is new again.
Well, you have certainly thought everything through, and that really shows. In case you guys have missed it, we have had David on the show a few times before, and I highly recommend going back to take a look at those episodes, especially if you're a fan of Star Trek Enterprise and the whole NX era.
But yes, a lot of time and attention has gone to everything David does, from ship design to universe building to alien design to bookwork. I'll tease that stuff too. So much to learn about his universe. So we encourage you to go back and watch the other originals we have done with him, and also ask the questions that you want to know, and anything else in the comments below. For any of the videos, he will keep checking and keep answering.
Yes, absolutely. Ask me anything, guys, down below. I love responding to the comments and stuff. It's a lot of good stuff.
So without any further ado,
we present another Trekyards original set in the Bessig verse, but let the creator himself tell you what's in store for today.
It will be my honor. Today, I present to you the Algerion class.
all right, so first off, just the facts. So this front fleet battlecruiser specialized in counter-battery fleet screening. Being designed in 2158 to 2159, the first launch of this class was on Earth date December 8th, 2159. The class went on to be in continuous construction from December of 2159 to April of 2166, having a total of 42 constructed.
Midlife refits were completed between 2176 and 2181. A total of 2 of these vessels were lost in the course of action over the years, leaving only 40 remaining as of 2190. Planned retirement for the class is scheduled for between 2196 and 2200, with it eventually being replaced by the Bonaventure class.
The ships were manufactured by Stellar Dynamics, who were, in fact, the original designers of the ship, and also by Teller Corp and Zuni Space Conglomerate after the Federation was more stable. Actual production of the vessel was performed at the Centauri Orbital Shipyards at Alpha Centauri 3 and Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards orbiting Mars.
The dimensions of the ship were a total length of 360 meters, or 264 meters from deflector array to hangar doors, a total height of 56 meters, or 42 meters from top of the bridge dome to bottom of the lower sensor dome, and a total width of 223 meters.
Standard crew complement was between 350 to 380 personnel, with a maximum evacuation limit of 1,670 people. It's a lot more. The ship carried enough supply reserves for 4 months of service with a standard crew complement, and presumably like 45 minutes for the evacuation limit.
Auxiliary craft included 8 Class C work bees, 4 Mark 7 shuttle pods, 1 warp-capable shuttle, and 49 escape pods.
Sporting a pair of Type CW6 warp nacelles, the top speed was rated at 7.3 for 12 hours, a maximum sustainable cruising warp speed of warp 6.2, an emergency warp speed of 7.45 in a 2-hour burst, allowing for max cooldown time before attempting again. As per usual, there was a significant risk of fusing and frying the entire dilithium matrix and the warp coil conduits if you pushed that for too long.
The Algerion class holds a very controversial place in Starfleet design history. Work began in 2158 as the Romulan War raged on across the Alpha Quadrant. The goal was to take the NX class and all of its years of experience with hard lessons learned and build a mean fighting machine in its image. This new ship would be larger, faster, and considerably more heavily armored. New warp cores and Andorian weapon systems allowed for more of everything and harder-hitting phasers.
While the Allied powers were heavily focused on producing large numbers of smaller, modular ships, likely to be mass-produced, work on larger projects proceeded at a much slower pace. This resulted in work not being completed before the war ended in January of 2160, with only the first hull, the AG-01 SS Algerion, launching the previous December.
The class was named after the infamous world of Algerion, the location of Starbase 1, which was completely destroyed in a Romulan surprise attack which officially began the war in May of 2155. It is ironic, given that its namesake, that the ship was unable to participate in the war. Despite this, the ship class was permitted to retain its original namesake and human-centric naming conventions after the establishment of the United Federation of Planets and the new Starfleet in 2161.
While the ship performed extremely well in tests, all of which were combat-focused, following the foundation of the Federation, the ship's controversy begins. The problem was fairly simple and straightforward. Starfleet had designed a thoroughbred warship for a war that was no longer being waged. While new hulls were needed, it was initially hoped that Starfleet would return to a state of exploration.
This expected U-turn in the ship's mission profile resulted in a large number of modifications being made to the Algerion class, which handicapped its combat abilities and attempted to add more scientific and long-range capabilities. Unfortunately for the Algerion class, which was now well underway in production to replace the seriously outdated NX classes, things were about to get even worse.
Yes, that expected U-turn never came, and Starfleet doubled down on its military security first priorities. This resulted in yet another round of changes to the design to try and reincorporate its wartime functions and heavy combat capabilities after they were just taken out.
So in short, this resulted in a starship design caught between war and peace, which ultimately ended up not being well suited to either, and failed to measure up to expectations in both. Starfleet needed new ships, and it needed them fast. It was decided to continue production, but the ship's role in the fleet would be considerably less glamorous than originally planned. The need for a true NX replacement in both spirit and purpose was pushed to a later date when the quadrant was hopefully more stable.
As was the new norm for this decade, the entirety of the 2160s was focused on one mission: securing the Romulan neutral zone and preparing for the outbreak of renewed hostilities at any moment. So for the first 10 years of the ship's life, the majority of the Algerion-class vessels found themselves on the border, some solo and some in task force groupings.
Only in the early 2170s, with the completion of the neutral zone outpost network, did the Algerion-class ships finally get to go more places and expand their mission profiles. As a constant theme with this ship, it also did not go as expected. Due to the staggering size of the Romulan Star Empire, the young Federation was forced to expand rapidly, and this came in two forms.
First, there was the need to lock down and secure the territory around Romulan space, which both forced or allowed, depending on your historical preference, the Federation to establish large numbers of colonies, stations, and outposts. Secondly, was the admission of new worlds, which is a subject of history books all to their own.
After the great Allied advances of 2158 and 2159 into what was previously Romulan space, large numbers of liberated worlds urgently flocked to join the Federation out of fear of the Romulans and that would soon return. Nearby worlds that were not previously subjected to Romulan rule also quickly followed suit. Despite it being on the free side of the neutral zone, many of these worlds were in complete disarray and in desperate need of assistance.
Most Algerion-class ships found themselves tied up providing said assistance and managing the recovery and admittance of these beleaguered worlds into the young Federation. During this time period, the Federation Starfleet was spread dangerously thin, barely able to keep up with the rate of Federation expansion.
Many historians believe this rapid rate of growth and unchecked expansion of the Federation is largely to blame for the outbreak of the Kzinti War, which came shortly after in 2177 and 2178. It was here that the Algerion class finally had a chance to shine, and things began to go right for the design. The class fared well in combat against enemy capital ships and was able to hold its own against most combatants of comparable sizes and classes.
Everything changed when the Kzinti drones attack became a problem. Starfleet urgently began to develop new point defense and counter-battery systems. It is often said that the Defense Systems redesign program and the Algerion class were a match made in heaven. The Algerion proved extremely well suited for carrying large amounts of defensive-based weapons.
With this, the Algerion class found its place in the fleet and excelled beyond expectations. Packed to the brim with counter-batteries and point defense systems, the Algerion class would act as a fleet screening ship. Its job was to protect both larger and smaller ships, which would be vulnerable to the swarm of Kzinti drones and missile attacks.
By the end of the war, the Algerion class was refitted with a staggering combined armament of offensive and defensive weapons. These included 30 TCP-5 single-barrel phase turrets, 12 Mark III photonic torpedo tubes with 280 photonic warheads on board, 42 CMZ-8 counter-battery fire systems, 36 pods and fire tubes per battery, with a grand total of 1,512 ready to fire like that, with 1,200 in resupply storage, 38 M9 close-in weapons system, rapid-fire point defense batteries, and one Federation standard type DDS-8 deflector shield system.
When deployed in groups within large fleets, incoming Kzinti attacks were regularly decimated. This marked a huge turning point in the war for the Federation and allowed its forces to confidently go on the offensive, culminating in the Battle of Segroth Toten. During the massive battle, despite losing 2 ships with all hands, the Algerion class played a vital role in safeguarding the Federation fleet.
With the election of President Archer in the 2180s, work finally began on a dedicated exploration ship to succeed the long-retired NX class. Though politically turbulent, this class would eventually develop into the Bonaventure class, with the first hulls leaving dry dock in 2190. Well, that's it for the official and scripted, I've got to do right what's on the damn page, bit of this episode. So now we can have a more unscripted, behind-the-scenes discussion of yet another of the basic verse, or basic verse, whichever universe we happen to be in today, design. But I guess I'll start, though, David. So this is in essence, it's a Warship NX. Why give it such a turbulent and unnecessarily complicated story around was essentially just let's make a more Warship NX?
Well, 2 reasons. One is that in real world history, if anybody reads a lot of defense news, you'll know that there's a lot of naval adventures, shall we say, specifically in the United States, like take the LCS classes or the Freedom Littoral Combat ships, for example, where it is drama on drama on drama, and nothing ever works right, and redesign after redesign until they finally get the ship where they want it to be. And even in the far future and the Federation with all its fantastic and wonderful technology, I think that that's just kind of a fact of life in engineering and anything you build, that some things are going to work and some things aren't going to work. And as we may have alluded to at least more than once here, that this ship's shortcomings directly paved the way for something much bigger and much better that did come later, which, had this ship succeeded, might not have needed to be made after all.
I do like the fact that the ship kind of had some growing pains, if you will. I love that it was designed for war. Oh, the war's over now. Federation's established. Peace, exploration. And then it shifted to that. Everybody talks about Starfleet being a military, but then Starfleet's not a military. Is that kind of the growth of the Starfleet we see in the future as being militaristic and yet not at the same time? I don't know if you'd call them really militaristic in Enterprise, because they were very undergunned and running up against people shooting at them all the time.
That kind of is why my Federation is a little more militarized at the beginning, because that exactly what you just said. It's like we went into this galaxy all happy and go lucky, and lo and behold, many of the people we've run into are trying to kill us, and they have like a lot of tools and methods of which to do that, as you see in Star Trek Enterprise. And then in my universe, the Romulan War is really kind of portrayed more as like a World War II in space level cataclysmic conflict that could have resulted in the extermination of many different species on the Allied side, including humanity. That was very much the Romulans' goal too, by the way. So it really shifted the paradigm of their thinking into a military organization. And you got to remember, the people who composed the very first days of the Federation, like they were from the Vulcan High Command, the Andorian Imperial Guard, the United Earth Starfleet, and specifically with the United Earth Starfleet, they were thinking of, well, last time we had a big scuffle, like with the Xindi per se, it was like, let's go explore. Okay, now we have to go shoot. Okay, let's go back to exploring. So that was kind of the mindset they had going into it. But that thinking didn't really line up with the reality of the day, which is why they started retooling it to exploration. And then the bigger new Federation government of everybody together said, nope, we're not doing that.
Well, I really like that because it maintains Gene Roddenberry's ideals that humans have evolved to the point where they're out exploring, they're peaceful essentially. But we've talked with Doug Drexler as well about which ship would win in a battle. He's like, why do they have to fight? My explanation is, well, you're going out there. Not everybody's going to have the same goals as you. They might have a pretty big stick. You need to have a bigger stick to be able to defend yourself. So I love that it ties Gene Roddenberry's original vision, because a lot of people complain that it's too militaristic. And it goes against Gene's vision, but I like what you did because it ties it together with his, and yet still being able to appreciate our history and how we are as a people as well. So
I find it interesting that it's such, obviously that's the point of the story, that it was swapped. But I'm kind of dubious about if they actually put that much effort into redesigning it, if they wouldn't just design a new class. If they're that close to having a functional ship that works, that's very militaristic, just build less of them and then swap to a new design. They clearly wasted more time redesigning than to build a new ship. It's like you wouldn't redesign the Defiant or Prometheus to explorers, you would just build a different ship. So I'm kind of, obviously I know that in the NX era, but less so in your version, they were limited with ships. In your version was they built way more, so that's less of a problem. They could have designed a new ship. But I'm wondering sort of what political mentality forced them to redesign something that didn't need to be redesigned. And if you just remove some gun batteries, you wouldn't need to redesign much, because as we can see on the hull, they're just sort of slapped on. You could just take them off, and then the redesign element, I think, is a good idea, but unnecessary as well.
Politically speaking, this ship is an example of a federation, a very young federation, and the story is written like this for the ship because it's supposed to show that they don't really have their footing yet, and not every decision they make is the right decision. And I really wanted this to be like the Federation is trying to do a million things right now to establish themselves, and this is obviously important, but they're going to make wrong decisions. A very good way to think about this in a real-world historical context is imagine in an alternate universe that the United States had just fought a war of independence against the United Kingdom. Massive, huge, big conventional war. Yeah, looking at you, Sam.
Why? We're so great.
But in this alternative universe, though, things are a little different, where maybe instead of 13 states, maybe it's 30 states exist. And half of those states weren't even part of the United States, but they got decimated by the war anyways. And immediately after fighting this massive war, not only do we have to put our original 13 colonies back together after fighting that, we also have another 15 states now that weren't our problem previously, which are now part of our problem, which is the connection there is you have the core worlds of the Federation who were fighting this pitched battle against the Romulan Empire. And then all of a sudden, they had to inflate exponentially larger than they were at their inception. And in some other ships and works, we're going to continue talking about the history of the Federation. And you had your 4 signatory members at the beginning, but you'll see, as we alluded to in the script, it had to balloon very quickly, because if you look at any Star Trek map about the size of the Romulan neutral zone and just how many light years that encompasses, there would have to be some means and mechanism of controlling that territory. So the Federation would have had to expand in that shape to encompass them. And also in doing so, a lot of that territory that they're moving into was previously occupied by the Romulans. So these people are essentially entire sectors worth of planets that were occupied by a hostile force that really messed them up pretty badly, that are the Federation is going to help them because that's what they're going to do, and B, many of them are saying, I want to be part of this Federation because everybody's mind thought is the Romulans could be back tomorrow, and this is kind of the only option we have right now. So you'll see the Federation grow very quickly for that reason, which I think is logically supported by just the facts of what's happening around.
Although wouldn't you think then that because of these new political influences of the border world, they would say, no, please don't decommission a warship. Can we just have it on the border? You'd think if there's enough of those people, they'd be able to present enough of a force saying, no, we want, keep them. We've already built 40, just have them on the border then, if that's the biggest worry.
And that's pretty much like what happened. That's why they didn't go back to build a new ship. They were just like, well, these are the holes that we have floating around. Stick a bunch of guns on them and send them over there.
I mean, the same thing kind of happened in the Defiance design history. Like, it was designed to beat the Borg. And then we've talked about this before on Trekyards, that the political or the upheaval from the people, the general population, was like, we don't want to build a warship or the Federation. So it kind of got sidelined a little bit, and then had to be built at some point, and that was proved quite useful. So I kind of like that the political side of things and then the civilian side of things fighting with each other, because that would happen essentially. So, and
ironically, it's the giving up and losing the battle of the politics of that day, and they lost the war of the grander. Well, it shouldn't have been unfitted, but they had to win the political battle today, even if it cost them the war later, or at least worry about the war later. But I have really only one big design question though. What are those details between the bridge dome and the the sticking outy bridge dome and the warp nacelles? They're just kind of like Tesla coils of like...
Yeah, so that kind of ties into my thought of subspace communication, which I think we talked about a little bit in the last 2 ships, and I guess we'll just keep expanding on it. The principle is, if you're sending data or anything through subspace, to me, this is just a Bissig-verse-ism, is there needs to be some means of compartmentalizing that data stream and putting it into subspace. And the way we put a starship into subspace is with warp nacelles and warp coils powered by antimatter engines. So the thought process, I guess, is kind of loosely connected to, if I'm going to put data into subspace, it has to get in there somehow and maybe kind of ish look like a warp system where maybe there's coils and glowing stuff involved to compartmentalize that and send it out into subspace in whatever direction it's supposed to go.
That's great, actually. Now, you do talk a lot about point defense systems and stuff on your ships, which really hasn't been a thing in Star Trek. I mean, it is in Starfleet battles. That's a big part of it, especially fighting the Kzintis or people that have missile-based systems. Because even Starfleet Command, the games had point defense for incoming drones and stuff. So talk to us a little bit about the point defense systems and why you feel it's so important even in the future. Like, you think things would get that close to the ship necessarily?
This is, heavily influenced by real-world military applications. So I was in the Army. I wasn't in the Navy, but even in the Army, they have these Sea-Whiz batteries that they deploy around Army posts in like Afghanistan and Kuwait and Iraq. And you can go look at videos of them on YouTube. Whenever enemy mortar fire comes in, these things start lighting up like, Christmas trees all over the night sky, trying to intercept the incoming mortar rounds. And with the Navy, that's even more imperative because most of the munitions coming at the ship are guided rounds, not dumbfire rounds. So it's critical that they have a way of knocking those out. And if you do any reading on 21st century modern naval military tactics, the premise on all countries is essentially the same thing. It's, I want to have a ship that's firing more missiles at you than your defense batteries can shoot down. So the idea is you have a Russian ship and an American ship, and the Russians want to fire 30 missiles at you, but they only need 1 or 2 to get through. And every real-world Navy's concept of how we fight other ships right now is pretty much that. And I'm sure with technology that will continue to change. But I kind of kept taking that line of thought and moving forward, and also tying that into Star Trek Enterprise with how that's not something you see in Star Trek. But if you watch all the battles in Star Trek Enterprise, how many times did they get hit by something that they could have intercepted had they had something like this installed on board, or if they had a system like the CMZ battery where they could essentially deploy a phaser disrupting smoke screen around the ship and get out of there. So all of these technologies are things that they would have greatly benefited from. And through their experiences with those last 2 big wars we talked about, it's really like, okay, we need to have this stuff in my universe. That would be the way they would think about it. Hopefully that answered what you were.
Yeah, absolutely it did. That's awesome. So I do want to thank you for including those because, like I said, they are in the Starfleet Battles game and stuff. And even the Kzinti, like, are we going to get more into the Kzinti side of things in your universe as well?
Stuart, this is David we're talking about.
I know.
What a silly question.
I'm playing the stupid interviewer for the audience out there.
You play it so well.
Spin like a battery of firing things.
It's gonna spin like a Sea-Whiz battery. When you see how much stuff is coming down the pike here, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, trust me. He sent us details about the stuff he's been writing, and it's fantastically thought out. So there's a lot coming, guys.
Yes, especially in the next video.
Yeah, which, speaking of, that's probably a good place to end it here. We're going to have you back on for quite a few different things, and we've had a few videos with you already, so check those out, guys, if you haven't. If you have any questions or want to continue the conversation with David here, put them down in the comments section below. Don't forget to give a big thumbs up for the video, and make sure you're subscribed, obviously, so you don't miss any future content. So,
well, if you can support us, like David's supporting us, then you can get a Trekyards original yourself. If you've got your own design, if you've got your own 3D modeling build like David has, or if you haven't, we have our own team. Email trekyards@hotmail.com. Fair to say, David, it's a fun process, the originals process?
Oh, yeah, it's a blast working with the team, guys. How could you not want to do this?
And literally, even napkin sketches we've taken to full 3D. Bit of a weird process, but we love it, especially. So if you can, it's great. And obviously donate the normal ways, PayPal, Patreon, join the channel, etc. All makes a difference. And just tune in and go backwards to David's stuff. Just keep forward and backing on David's content. It's good. It's good stuff.
So, David, thank you for joining us yet again, and we look forward to more different variety of ships with you in the future. So, thank you for joining us yet again.
Thank you for having me, guys.
All right. So, until next time, guys, I'm Captain Foley.
I'm Connor Cockins and guest.
I'm David Bissig.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.